Hello and welcome to Oakville Matters. Thank you for joining us. You know, there's not a lot of crime in Halton. We boast of having the lowest crime rate in the country. But when crime does happen, you'd be surprised to know what an amazing job the Halton Police Service provide to help people who are the victims of crime. And with me today to help explore this topic for your benefit is Kimberley Clark and Jeff Hill. Kimberley is the administrator of the Victim Services Unit at Halton Police, and Jeff Hill is the superintendent of a vast array of things having to do with investigation and enforcement. You should tell what it is.
I'm the superintendent in charge of regional investigative services.
Investigative services. So when it's hard to find out, he finds out.
That's right. It's my job.
And you have a long, actually, track record in investigation.
I've been in investigations pretty much my entire career, in some shape or form, in every rank in almost every district, and it's something I love to do, and I have a real passion for it. So
you took a detour to be a temporary position.
I was in charge of human resources for 4 years, and then I had the excellent opportunity to do the acting deputy position for 9 months. So it was a great educational experience for me.
So he's being too modest. I got to call him Deputy Chief. So Deputy was kind of a shortened form of that.
Yes, Deputy Chief.
And Kimberley, you have a fascinating history for how you got here that leads to a really interesting angle on how we do victim services here. Why don't you just share how you got into it and the path that led you to us?
Sure. Well, a number of years ago, probably close to 20 years now, I started as a volunteer with Victim Services of Peel.
Even though you live here?
I was living in Peel at the time,
okay.
And had done the volunteer work, really enjoyed it, and was offered a position to run their DVERS program, which is their Domestic Violence Emergency Response System program, dealing with victims at high risk of violence. So I took that position, and I would say about 3 years after that, there was an opportunity to apply for a position as an executive director in Waterloo Region. They didn't have a victim services in Waterloo Region, so they were looking for somebody to create that and leave that footprint. So I was honored to have been offered that position. I spent 11 years there and was chair of the province of Ontario for Victim Services. And I had the opportunity to meet the now retired deputy chief at one of the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police meetings, and he informed me that Halton was expanding their victim services unit, and I threw my hat in the ring and have been on with Halton for 4 years and absolutely love it.
Well, I'm glad that you're here, and I'm fascinated by the way, I guess the great majority, like 48 places, it's the ministry that conducts perhaps not as good a program as we have, and there's 7 jurisdictions that we roll our own. And that allows Halton to rise to the top, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a number of differences between the community agencies. The community agencies receive a funding envelope from the Ministry of the Attorney General, and they have a contract to deliver certain services. And they report to a board of directors, and it's a very standard process. The one drawback is access to information. So unfortunately, there are a number of victims out there, but due to privacy issues, they don't have access to the information to reach out to those victims. Civilian membered units of a police service are a little bit different in the sense that we work a little bit more collaboratively, and we have access to that information and can reach out to those most vulnerable.
Right. Well, the whole thing's consistent with the spirit of Halton Regional Council. Halton Regional Council, under Gary Carr's leadership, believes in being inclusive and trying to make sure that everybody participates in the success of our community. And where a service to the population isn't good enough that maybe the province is responsible for, Halton hasn't been shy about filling the gap and doing a better job. And the people who receive those services, I think, highly appreciate that. Now, when you find yourself the victim of a crime, there's a lot more available to help you than people would realize. And it's interesting how this comes about. think about it. Imagine yourself a police officer for a second. You're at the scene of a possibly violent crime. You've got bystanders and victims and others who are probably not feeling really great at the moment. I mean, a trauma or a stressful situation can make you upset at the very least, angry. There's lots of emotions that will flood through you. And the police officers who have arrived, and remember, you're imagining that you're the police officer, you kind of want to solve the crime and catch the clues and get the work underway. And there's these people who they've got very strong needs they need to be dealt with. Before victim services existed, guess what? The crime work had to wait. And in Halton, we pride ourselves on having the highest, most successful crime solution rate, and enter victim services. Victim services comes along and helps clear the crime scene, get people comfortable, and let the police officers do their job. Mm-hmm. So in the aftermath, you have a lot of tools to bring to people. Can you just give us a summary of those?
Sure. Essentially what happens is we would arrive on scene, and you hit the nail on the head. Victim services has been the province's best kept secret, and unless you're the victim of a crime, you probably don't know about victim services, which is why it's important that we do work so closely with the investigative units to make sure that when we arrive on scene that we have information for people who are victims of crime. Oftentimes they're very isolated, they're scared, they really have no idea what lies ahead. So we're able to tell them who the organizations are in this community that they can reach out to, what some of their options are, particularly if you're talking about sexual assault or domestic violence or human trafficking. And we're able to help restore a little bit of balance back in their life. It can be a very overwhelming process. So our role is really to come in and break that overwhelming process down into smaller, more manageable components.
So I was thinking that when famously in the TV dramas, when they catch the criminal, they read them their rights. Mm-hmm. And it struck me, one of our pamphlets reads the victims their rights, because it turns out the victims have rights to information, they have rights to participation, and they have rights to protection, and they have certain rights to retribution or compensation. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about, you just mentioned information, which is what reminded me of this set of 4 rights. Can you walk through the other ones? And because there's money in this as well, right?
Yeah, so the Victims' Bill of Rights provincially was enacted in 1995. And that essentially said that victims had the right to information, the right to support, the right to protection. It was a little bit more vague. So in 2012, we had the Canadian Act that came in sort of as a federal legislation. So essentially, victims have the right to information. So information about their case, what's happening with their case, upcoming court dates and things like that. They have the right to protection, and protection is important. So they have the right to have safety planning, the right to have outreach to communities, to find out where they can get the assistance that they need. Also, in terms of the criminal process, they have the right to go through the civil process as well. So oftentimes people will do that if they don't get what they deem as justice or success in the criminal process. And they also have the right to make a complaint. So if they do not get what it is that they're looking for, if the rights are not adhered to, then they have the opportunity to complain that they didn't get that fair process.
Do they also have a right to the kinds of help that cost money, like counseling and whatever? Mm-hmm. Maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah, so that financial piece is the civil piece, but it's also what we deliver, which is the Victim Quick Response Program, or what we call the VQRP program. So what that is a program that under certain specific categories of crime, people who have been the victims of those crimes can have expenses reimbursed to them. So it could be damages done to their home, replace windows, replace doors, replace locks, things like that, things that will help make them safer. It would also give them counseling, not just for themselves as the primary victim, but for other family members who are secondary victims that experience that crime as well. In terms of human trafficking, those individuals have the right to go to treatment facilities. There are a number of different categories of reimbursements that they can have.
And there's some limits on the reimbursement.
Sure.
It's not a blank check.
Right.
But how much how much financial assistance to the victims of crime happens in Halton?
Well, last year, 2017, we contributed $326,000 back into this community through refunded expenses. So that means a number of those victims were victims of crime, and we were able to refund them for specific categories.
I wonder if that doesn't sound like it could, I mean, that doesn't sound like very much. Does that mean we don't have very much crime at all? I mean, how does this work? What about, Jeff, I hear from people, as mayor, I hear from people who feel threatened, but a crime hasn't happened yet, and they want me, bylaw, or the police to intervene, and you know, they have a strong apprehension that whatever they're feeling threatened by is going to get them, and we should. They're very frustrated when they're told that they get the impression that they have to wait till it actually happens, and that. You can imagine how perverse that feels if you're on the receiving end of that.
Correct.
What's the story there?
Well, as you were fully well aware, we do have an excellent leading community safety well-being plan, and there's 4 pillars of that plan, being risk intervention, prevention, which speaks to exactly what you're speaking of, social development, and emergency response. A lot of what police officers, or what people see is the emergency response. It's responding to the crisis, and victim services does a lot of that as well, being those first responders with us at the scenes of sudden deaths, helping people get into that gateway of community support. When you speak of the social development and the prevention, that is speaking to exactly what you're speaking of. Developing proactive solutions and not waiting for things to happen. Developing systems on how to prevent crimes from happening and preventing risk.
So if Kimberley is out walking her young daughter and in a lovely spring day, and you're out walking your, let's imagine, pit bull, and Kimberley feels threatened by that fact, and let's say you don't behave in a friendly way, maybe even you say something like, "I'm going to get you."
Yes.
Is Kimberley supposed to just suck that up and
No, not at all. Through our community mobilization members, you can speak to people for advice. You can call the police, and we can come and speak to you. We can give you different advice. I wouldn't suggest to anybody that if you're ever in a position where you feel uncomfortable in your community, I think you need to reach out to us so that we can do anything we can to address that feeling for you.
So you won't just refer them to the Humane Society or the bylaw people? Or?
No, if there's something said in that scenario, that's something that we want to investigate. The reality is, we all know perception is reality. And the idea of policing is, as you've often said, is that the public is the police, and police are the public, and it is our role to make everyone feel comfortable and safe. And if it is a perception issue in the end, well, that's okay, but then we can give you that peace of mind, and we're working through that. That's what we're here for.
Well, it is true that I think Sir Robert Peel really had it nailed when he said what you said, the police are the public and the public are the police. We can only have as safe a community as we're willing to work together to have.
Right.
And you know, that's some wisdom from back to the early 1800s. And I think that's what sets Canada apart from, say, most of the United States in terms of our attitude towards policing. So I'm going to refer some people to you guys later today.
No problem.
On the basis of that. Are there limits to what kinds of crimes victim services can respond to? Does it have to be a significant serious crime or a violent or a traumatic crime?
In terms of our intervention, whether it's phone, we can respond to anything, even if people have questions. They're not sure about where to go to get help, or maybe a friend of theirs is going through something and they're afraid to call because they don't know what the process looks like. And I would say specifically domestic violence.
So we have a little bit of a graphic that might help explain this, that sort of sets out the 4 different areas, and I think we're going to look at that. There, we're looking at that, and so that'll help as you talk.
So our immediate crisis intervention, typically the only time we would be on scene is if we were asked by an officer. So that would probably be a crime. More often than not, it would be violent. However, we do that phone follow-up as well, like I said, just for people that have questions about what that process looks like going forward.
So that would be domestic violence, sex assault, hate crimes,
any type of crime,
homicide.
any type of crime, absolutely, absolutely.
These sound heavy duty.
Yeah. Absolutely. And for those crimes, then we would get involved with the Victim Quick Response Program because we're able to provide that financial assistance piece for them. But sometimes it goes on much longer. It may not just be the here and now. We may work with the families down the road. They may not want the program right off the bat, so that's why there's a time span, maybe 90 days, maybe 120 days, because it allows somebody the time to think about whether or not they want to take advantage of this program.
Yeah. So Jeff, you're on the scene as an investigator. You may not call victim services because there may be no sign of need, and sometimes a bad reaction to stress happens days later.
Correct.
Then you might be reached out to.
Absolutely.
And that's a scenario where the officer on scene would provide that information. I mean, everybody suffers or feels trauma in a different manner, but we know that a quick response to that trauma is key to a successful outcome down the road. They may have their own resources that's on scene, but as the commander of homicide, I've had experiences where events have happened involving sudden deaths, where the person still years later, there's always a need for information, there's a need for support, and it doesn't end just after that day. I don't exaggerate when I say when you're that officer on scene, victim services, when they're there helping you control a scene, some of these scenes can be very chaotic, there's a lot of emotion involved. We have a role in controlling the scene, preserving safety, and solving the crime ultimately, but we also have the just as important role of taking care of the people that are there. That could be secondary victims, the family members, other people that are witnesses that are suffering the trauma of witnessing perhaps whatever happened. So it's the victim services, when you talk with a crisis intervention, it's the total package of making sure that we're taking care of everybody that's affected at the moment, and then providing that gateway down the road to ensure they're taken care of after the fact. Because as we point out, it doesn't typically end after a couple hours or a day. Everybody feels trauma differently, and everybody's resilience is different. And that's the type of stuff that victim services can help and help people deal with.
Yeah, I was actually pleasantly surprised to learn that things I'd never thought about, but once I saw it, I realized, oh yeah, somebody's got to look after these things. There's emergency transportation costs, emergency child care. I mean, I don't know why that didn't come to mind. But crime scene cleanup, you never think about that. But,
very costly.
But
very
yeah,
costly.
It's constant. We've had it happen where something will happen to a mother or a father that's there, and their children are there. And it's, what do? You can't obviously leave little kids, so you have to cover off all those types of things, and that's often, a lot of times, what victim services will help us with that type of things.
So emergency accommodation and meals even.
Correct.
So what's the most unusual need that either of you has ever seen? Jeff?
Most unusual, it's...
All right, the most memorable. Well,
one of the things that we do often...
wait, I'll ask, so have you ever used this before?
I've used this, we've used this many times, and as I mentioned before, I have that unique perspective of, because of the different units that I lead with human trafficking and homicide, sex assault, I have the perspective that I see many different kinds of victims and many different kinds of treatment. And for example, in human trafficking, when you are doing an intervention in a human trafficking file, a lot of times those people are being controlled by the people that are benefiting from them. So they will need virtually everything. They will need...
So that's a category of vulnerable, that's one of the forms
Correct.
of vulnerable people, right?
That's right,
Yeah.
That's right. And it's a victim that is, and in that time of need, it takes a lot of courage and a lot of bravery to come forward and get yourself out of that system with our assistance. But you're going to be in a position where you need homes, you need food, you need clothing, you need a safe place to go, you need that support, because unfortunately these people, they're survivors of this type of abuse. So these are the things that we see. Thankfully in Halton, it's not something we see often, but it is something that we do see. And we need that assistance when we need it. It's not a scenario where we can wait or these people can wait, because they need the assistance when it's right there and then. So you need to be on top of it, and it's a godsend that we have this type of unit available to us.
And Kimberley?
Wow. I think, not one specific situation, but I think what resonates the most about this program is the fact that people feel, when a crime has occurred, people feel disconnected to their community and they feel isolated. And I think anytime that we're doing this intervention, we're providing this financial assistance, we're giving people an opportunity to restore their faith back in people, back in community. And I think no matter how long I do this, I think I'm just always amazed at the resiliency of victims, in the sense that something like this can really provide that assistance and help turn the world around. And they don't always remember what we said, but they always remember how we made them feel. And I think that is what makes the difference for us.
Now, we have monitoring devices that people can get, and I didn't originally think of those as part of the victim services, because they're really like that's prevention of becoming a victim, I guess.
Right.
I think of it as. But talk about that.
Well, we have two different devices. We have one that's our MTS program, which is the mobile tracking system, and that's typically for individuals at high risk of violence, typically at the hands of their partner, and that's GPS enabled. But then we have another program, which is the Vulnerable Persons Registry, and that is a bracelet that is provided to somebody who maybe struggles with Alzheimer's or dementia, or maybe acquired brain injury, something that makes them very vulnerable.
Or makes them wander.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And that's done through a radio frequency. So they're two different programs. And we have approximately 40 people on that Project Lifesaver program right now.
That sounds like it's a success.
It is.
I can tell you it's a huge success, and having been in my role as a senior officer, being a duty officer or search commander, I've often gone to scenes where we've had a person that's wandered, and sometimes there is an expanded amount of time that's drawn out since we've been called or we've been able to mobilize our services. With the Project Lifesaver, it is I think the average of being able to locate somebody with the technology we have is about 30 minutes. And you compare that to other scenarios where it's been 2 days or longer, where we're trying to find somebody using the technology that we have and the techniques that we have. It's an amazing piece of technology that if someone does have a family member that does have cognitive disabilities or does wander, and they have 24-hour care, that is something they should definitely look into and contact the service and see if this is something that should be for them.
Yeah, the way we got that is, I'm happy, sad about the way we got it. We brought it in from another jurisdiction who had it, and we found out about it when a person went missing, and the family told us about it. And I'm just really proud that we were able to get it, and now that there's 40 people on it, I don't think we wasted our time or our money.
No,
Definitely not.
But there were people at the time saying, do we really need this?
Yeah.
So,
it's definitely a good investment, there's no question.
Absolutely.
No question.
so the lesson there is, don't be afraid to lift your hand, and if you see a need for something, say something. It's a variation on the see something, say something. See a need, say something.
For sure.
Yeah.
And we do try to respond. The reason I was trying to get you to tell a warm and fuzzy story about going home at night and feeling good about having done victim services was so to try to make it more real for people. But your guarded answers make me think that you'd be probably invading privacy. So we're not going to. I guess we're not going to get a colorful example. So I can accept that. What's the future hold for victim services?
Well, there's a lot of very exciting things. First of all, we are going to be moving to a location which is 2 District in Oakville, where we will have a much larger space, which is fantastic because we're bursting at the seams right now because we're expanding. But the other...
I should joke here. Everybody wants to live in Oakville.
That's right.
Yes, it's a great place to live and work. But we're also getting a support dog. Probably in June, maybe July. And the idea is that we're trying to make sure that we can provide all types of support to all types of people.
I heard about a support hamster the other day in some, crazy news story about an airline misbehaving.
Yeah.
But a support dog I can get behind.
Yeah.
But where does it stop? Will there be a support goldfish? I'm not really trying to make fun of it.
Yeah. It's actually quite successful in many communities, especially.
What kind of dog will it be?
Well, we're hoping it's either going to be a retriever or a lab. We're partnering with the Lions Guide Dog Foundation, and they have been absolutely tremendous. And we have 2 handlers. We have a primary handler and a secondary handler, so this will be a dog with a job. It will go home with our staff every day, come into work every day. When it has its vest on, it's a staff member, and it's on the clock. When the vest comes off, it becomes a pet.
So now, some of their dogs, I know when they go around town, they tell you, now you can't pet them, right? Now, this is a dog to be petted?
This is a dog, when it has its vest on, it's not to be pet.
So how does it do its support dog job? That's what I'm curious about.
So it's essentially classical conditioning. So when the vest goes on, they first select a dog, though, that they think is going to be appropriate for this application. So it has to be a dog that's going to feel comfortable in a policing world. They're not going to be upset or distracted by lights and sirens and uniforms and things like that.
So is this a search role for the dog, or is it a comfort
It's a support
role?
role. It's a support and comfort role. So it could be a young child. It could be a female victim who's making a very difficult disclosure. And the beauty is that dogs can't be subpoenaed for court. So this is just a dog that can come in, it can lay by their feet, help them feel a little bit more comfortable.
But don't touch?
Well, they can in that role when the dog is working with a victim. It's just that you or I coming in as saying, "Oh, let me pet the dog." That's not the right time for that.
Okay, it's good to clear that up.
Yeah.
So
So the dog is taught two things. The dog is either taught to take a passive role and lay by somebody's feet, or they can go and say hello and put their head on somebody's lap if that's what they need, particularly a young child.
Okay. Well, you've made me feel a lot better. You haven't made me want to be a victim, but you've made me feel that if I am, I'll have support, and that's
Absolutely.
an important thing. In general, I feel very safe in Halton, and that one gang crime wave that you guys rolled up the other day has made me feel safer again. Because that was a major spike.
Yes, it was, and a group that from outside the country, and even recently, because of the community response we had and community members phoning when they saw something suspicious. That's the type of stuff that we need, and that, quite frankly, is what caused us to solve that crime. Is community involvement.
Yeah, was it a dog walker?
Yes. It actually happened again the other day. A person phoned in, and we made another arrest the other day.
So everybody who's out walking your dog, please pick up after your dog. But otherwise, you're becoming the front line. Eyes on the street. Both of these cases, it was dog walkers who have bought into the idea. If you see something, you should say something, and bam. Fast results.
People know their communities and their neighborhoods better than anybody, so they're the best to know when there's a car in the neighborhood that they don't recognize or people acting suspiciously. Trust their instincts.
And I think we also like the way people have put video in some of the neighborhoods in their homes. I know that gave a lot of good evidence too in chasing the international gang. And that was an eye-opener for me. I thought we were a target community of the rest of the GTA, but it turns out the GTA is a target community for crooks from across the world.
That's right. Yeah.
So with that, I want to thank you for joining us today for Oakville Matters, and I hope you'll join us next time. See you then.